"You don't own a blade of grass here, Mr. Hendricks," Marlene Kessler said, tapping her clipboard against her Mercedes hood. "This land belongs to Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, has for 11 years. I stood in the gravel drive of my grandfather's homestead, dust still settling from her tires, and I didn't say a word back. Not yet." Behind her, 60 houses sat where cattle used to graze. 2-story stucco boxes with 3-car garages, sprinklers hissing across land that had never grown anything but Bermuda grass and my family's sweat. Whispering Pines. That's what they called 900 acres my grandfather bled for. 11 years, 60 homes, $2,600 a month in land use fees from every single family living there. Do that math sometime. It comes to something north of $2.6 million collected by a woman who never owned an acre of what she was selling. By the end, Marlene Kessler would owe restitution that made grown men whistle in the courtroom gallery. But the number wasn't the worst part for her. The worst part was watching 60 houses roll off her stolen ground on flatbed trailers, one after another, in broad daylight, with a sheriff's deputy standing right beside me holding a certified copy of a document she never knew existed. She thought she was bullying an old rancher off a technicality. She had no idea I was holding a 99-year lease with her name written all over its expiration clause. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is Walter Hendricks. Everyone who matters calls me Walt. I'm 67 years old, and for 31 of those years I wore an army uniform, combat engineer, then land surveyor for the Corps, stationed everywhere from Fort Hood to Kandahar. I know how to read a property deed the way some men read scripture. I know how to find the seam in a legal document the way I once found the seam in a minefield, slow, careful, and without letting anybody see me sweat. I came home to Texas in March, 3 months after my wife Carol passed. Lung cancer took her quiet, the way it takes a lot of good women, and I buried her next to my mother in the little cemetery behind the old barn. 3 generations of Hendricks family lie in that ground. My grandfather Otto, who broke this land in 1924. My father Elmer, who ran 400 head of Hereford cattle across it through 2 droughts and 1 flood. And now Carol, who never once complained about the smell of hay and diesel that clung to everything we owned. That smell, God, that smell. Diesel and cut hay and the particular mineral tang of well water. That's what home smells like to me. Not candles, not fresh paint, diesel and hay. My grandfather Otto Hendricks didn't buy this land outright. Nobody in 1924 had that kind of money. What he did have was a 99-year lease, signed with the Caldwell Land Company for 900 acres along the Brazos River bottom. The lease had one clause that mattered more than any other, tucked into paragraph 14 in fading typewriter ink. Upon expiration, all land shall revert to lessor's heirs free and clear of improvements, structures, or encumbrances. Free and clear of improvements. Otto signed that lease standing at a roll-top desk he built himself out of Brazos River oak in 1899. A desk that still sits in my study today, drawer pulls worn smooth by 4 generations of hands. He couldn't have known, sanding that desk by lamplight, that the paper he'd someday sign at it would outlive him, outlive his son, and land back in the hands of a grandson he barely got to meet. The lease ran out on my watch, 99 years from 1924. I did that math while I was still overseas actually, pulled up the old lease Dad kept in a fireproof box, did the arithmetic on a legal pad in a plywood office outside Kandahar, and thought, well, that's something to look into when I get home. I did not expect to come home and find 60 houses on it. Marlene Kessler had been president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association for 11 years. Before that, she'd been a mid-level real estate agent in Waco with a mediocre sales record and a talent for talking people into things. Now she drove a leased Mercedes GLE she couldn't actually afford, wore a blazer that cost more than my truck's last oil change, and carried a clipboard everywhere like it was a badge of office. She had President embroidered on her golf shirts. She had a laminated map of the development behind glass in the clubhouse lobby, with her name printed under a company logo, Whispering Pines Land Development Group. That, as I would come to learn, external only on paper. Incorporated by Marlene herself the same year the first house went up. 60 families lived out there thinking they'd bought a piece of Texas. They'd bought metership fees. They'd bought a fantasy built on a lease that expired the same spring Carol died, on land that was never, not for one single day, owned by the woman collecting their checks. I didn't know all that yet, standing in my gravel driveway that first morning. All I knew was a woman in a blazer was telling me I didn't own my own family's ground. I smiled at her, just a little. "Ma'am," I said, "I think you ought to go check your paperwork." Marlene's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. That flicker, the one I'd seen on interrogators and used car salesmen, and a colonel once who knew he was lying to my face. She tapped her clipboard twice, like it settled the matter. "My paperwork's fine, Mr. Hendricks. This parcel was deeded to the association in 2013. I'll have my attorney send you the recording number, if that'll help you sleep at night." Down the block, a screen door creaked. Dale Pruitt, 3 houses in, stepped onto his porch in socks and a Cowboys t-shirt, coffee mug in hand, watching us the way folks watch weather roll in. Behind him, a curtain twitched in the Alvarez place. Word travelled fast in a subdivision built on gossip and quarterly HOA newsletters. I didn't raise my voice. 31 years in the army teaches you that the man who yells first usually loses the room. "You do that," I said. "Send me the recording number. I'll send you something too." "And what's that?" "Something older than your parcel deed." That's the only card I showed her that morning, the small one, not the real one. I let her think I meant some minor easement dispute, some grandfather's fence line grievance. I watched her decide I was a nuisance, not a threat. Watched her write something on her clipboard, snap the pen, and walk back to her Mercedes without another word. I stood in that driveway a long moment after she left, breathing diesel and cut grass, listening to 60 sprinkler systems hiss across ground that had grown Hereford cattle for 89 years. Then I went inside, sat down at Otto's roll-top desk, and started making calls. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. I wrote that down in a spiral notebook before I even opened the envelope, because that's what 31 years in uniform teaches you. Write down the time before you write down anything else, because time is the one thing nobody can argue with later. The envelope had the Whispering Pines HOA letterhead on it, a pine tree logo, green ink. Inside was a Notice of Violation and Assessment, dated that same day, informing me that my unauthorized outbuilding, meaning the equipment barn my grandfather built in 1931, standing on the same foundation it had stood on for 92 years, was in violation of Section 4.2 of the Association's Architectural Guidelines. Fine, $500, due within 15 days, with an additional $50 per day thereafter. I read it twice. Then I read the attached Declaration of Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, recorded, according to the header, in Becks County in 2013. I know how to read a recorded instrument. I spent 4 years teaching junior engineers how to read recorded instruments. So when I got to the part where it claimed the association held fee simple title to all real property within the platted boundaries of Whispering Pines, including, but not limited to, Tract 14, formerly known as the Hendricks Ranch, I did not get angry. I got quiet. Quiet is more dangerous than angry, and it took me until I was 50 to learn that. I photographed the notice, front and back, with my phone, timestamp visible in the corner. I photographed the covenant document, page by page. Then I drove into Waco and had them printed at a copy shop on Franklin Avenue, because paper doesn't disappear when your phone gets stolen or your cloud account glitches. I bought a fireproof lockbox that afternoon too, twin to the one my father kept his important papers in, and I put the copies inside it next to Otto's original lease. That evening, I sent Marlene Kessler a letter by certified mail, return receipt requested. Not angry, just factual. I informed her that the barn in question had stood since 1931, predating both the association and its declaration by 82 years, and requested a certified copy of the deed by which the association claimed to hold title to Tract 14. I CC'd myself. I kept the green certified mail receipt stapled to the copy in my lockbox. Here's what most homeowners don't know. When an HOA sends you a violation notice, you are not required to simply pay it and hope for the best. Under Texas Property Code Section 209.006, an association must give a homeowner written notice and a reasonable opportunity to cure before assessing fines. And, more importantly, an association can only enforce restrictions actually contained in a validly recorded declaration covering property it actually has authority over. If the underlying claim of ownership is false, the whole tower of fines collapses. I didn't say any of that to Marlene yet. I just asked politely for her deed. She didn't answer the letter. She answered in person. Saturday morning, 9:15 a.m. I was replacing a hinge on the barn door when her Mercedes came up the gravel drive fast enough to throw dust over my truck. She got out in a different blazer, same clipboard, and this time she'd brought company. A man in a golf shirt with an HOA badge clipped to his belt, and a second man I didn't recognize, holding a tape measure. "Mr. Hendricks," Marlene said, "you're 7 days past the cure period on your violation notice. That's an additional $350 in accrued penalties, and if it's not resolved by end of month, the association is authorized to file a lien against the property." "Lien against what property?" I said. Not a question, a fact wrapped in a question mark. The way you talk to a suspect you already know is lying. "Against Tract 14, she said, like she was reading off a form, which, again, is a platted lot within Whispering Pines subdivision, subject to our declaration. I set down my hammer. "Ma'am, my grandfather built this barn in 1931. My father was born in the house behind it. There is no plat. There is no subdivision on this tract. There's a lease, and it's not yours." Her eyes did that flicker again, faster this time. "I don't know what lease you're talking about." "You will," I said. The man with the tape measure had wandered toward the cemetery fence, and something in me went cold and still, the way it used to when a private wandered too close to a marked perimeter. "That's my family's ground back there," I said, loud enough to stop him mid-step. 3 generations. You'll want to stay on this side of the fence." Marlene snapped her fingers at him without looking, and he backed off. She handed me a folded paper, the lien notice, pre-printed, only my name and the amount filled in by hand, and said, "I'd hate for this to escalate, Mr. Hendricks. Most folks around here just pay the fine and move on with their lives." "I imagine they do," I said. She left. I photographed the lien notice. I wrote the time in my notebook, 9:31 a.m., end of encounter, and I went inside and called my cousin Pete, who'd retired from the Texas Real Estate Commission 4 years back and still knew every clerk in 3 counties. Pete met me at the McLennan County Clerk's office that Monday. It took him 11 minutes to find what Marlene Kessler had spent 11 years hoping nobody would look for. The 2013 deed the association relied on wasn't a deed at all. It was a quitclaim instrument, filed by an entity called Whispering Pines Land Development Group LLC, an LLC formed by Marlene Kessler herself 6 weeks before the filing, with Marlene as sole registered agent. A quitclaim deed only transfers whatever interest the grantor actually holds. If the grantor holds nothing, the grantee receives nothing. Under Texas Property Code, Section 13.001, recording a document doesn't manufacture ownership out of thin air. It just puts the world on notice of whatever claim, real or fictional, someone's making. And Marlene's LLC had never owned so much as a fence post on Tract 14. There was no underlying deed from the Caldwell Land Company, no probate transfer, no tax sale, nothing. Just a quitclaim from a company that owned nothing to an association that then sold land use rights to 60 homebuyers as if it was selling actual dirt. That's when I went home and pulled Otto's lease out of the lockbox and read it slow, all the way through, for the first time since Kandahar. 99 years. Signed August 1924. Caldwell Land Company, lessor. Otto Hendricks, lessee. Renewable at lessee's option in 10-year increments. My father had exercised 2 of those renewals, receipts still paperclipped to the back page. But the outside term, the hard ceiling, was 99 years from execution. That put final expiration at August 2023, 6 months ago. Paragraph 14. Upon expiration of this lease, all right, title and possessory interest in the herein described 900 acres shall revert absolutely to lessee, his heirs, successors and assigns, free and clear of any improvement, structure, or encumbrance placed thereon during the term hereof. I sat at Otto's desk a long time with that page in my hands, the smell of old paper and the desk's linseed oil finish mixing with the diesel smell drifting in through the open window from my own generator. My grandfather had signed his name at this exact desk, in this exact room, 99 years before Marlene Kessler ever printed a business card. The Caldwell Land Company had dissolved in 1958, its remaining interests, including reversionary rights to leased land, passing by court order to its shareholders' heirs. I spent 3 days tracing that chain with Pete's help, county by county, and it came back clean, every link notarized, every link recorded. There was no gap for Marlene or anybody else to have stepped into. When the lease expired in August, the entire 900 acres, including the 60 houses sitting on it, reverted to me, free and clear of improvements. She'd been selling land she never owned to people who now, without knowing it, were living on land she had no right to build on in the first place. I didn't run to a lawyer that same hour. I sat with it, because underneath the fury, and there was fury, make no mistake, thinking of Carol's grave sitting inside a cemetery this woman had once threatened to fence off as unauthorized outbuilding number 2, underneath the fury was a colder, older instinct. Don't move until you know exactly how big the thing is you're standing on. That's when Ruth Colby came to my door. She was 78 years old, small enough that her cardigan looked 2 sizes too big, an oxygen concentrator on wheels trailing behind her like a loyal dog. She'd been a combat nurse in Vietnam, she told me later, 1969 to 1971, and she still stood like she expected inspection. She lived 3 streets over, in a brick 1-story with a wheelchair ramp her late husband had built the year his hip gave out. "You're the Hendricks boy," she said, though I hadn't been a boy in 50 years. "I heard you found something out about the land." I asked her how she'd heard that, and she smiled, oxygen line hissing faintly under her nose. "Small neighborhood, Mr. Hendricks. Marlene's been telling people you're a troublemaker, stirring up nothing. But she came by my house Thursday and told me if I didn't stop asking about my drainage assessment, she'd report my dog to animal control and get my handicap ramp cited as a structure violation. I've paid that woman 11 years of fees on a house I thought I owned outright." "You do own it," I said. "Outright, near as I can tell. It's the ground under it that's the question." Ruth's eyes were sharp, sharper than a woman on oxygen had any right to look. "Then maybe," she said, "it's time somebody asked that question loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Wednesday, 4:12 p.m. I wrote the time down before I even got out of the truck because the sight in front of me demanded it. A backhoe was parked at the edge of the family cemetery, engine idling, diesel smoke curling into the September heat. 2 men in Whispering Pines maintenance shirts stood at the wrought iron gate my great-grandfather had hung in 1926, and one of them had a pair of bolt cutters clamped around the padlock chain I'd replaced myself only 2 weeks before. Marlene stood off to the side in a cream-coloured blazer, clipboard against her hip, directing them like she was staging a photo shoot. "That's an unpermitted structure blocking association right-of-way," she was saying, loud enough to carry. "Cut it, I'll deal with the paperwork later." I didn't run, I didn't shout. I pulled my phone out and started recording, and I stayed far enough back that the whole scene sat clean in the frame. The gate, the men, the backhoe, Marlene's mouth moving. The chain snapped, the gate swung open, and one of the men started walking the backhoe's bucket toward Otto's headstone, toward my father's, toward Carol's, where the dirt was still dark from being turned 6 months before. I found my voice then, not loud, just carrying. "Stop right there," I said, "or I will have you arrested for desecration of a burial site under Texas Health and Safety Code, Chapter 711. That's a state jail felony, not a fine." The backhoe stopped. The operator looked at Marlene, then at me, then back at Marlene, and in that pause, I watched a grown man decide he wasn't going to lose his freedom for a woman in a leased Mercedes. Marlene didn't back down, not right away. "This is association property," she said. "You've got a lawsuit coming for obstruction, Mr. Hendricks, and I'll enjoy watching you lose it." "You cut a chain that wasn't yours to cut," I said, "on ground you don't own, over graves that are 3 generations of my blood. I've got you on video, every second of it." She looked at my phone like it had teeth. Then she turned on her heel, told the crew to hold off until legal sorts it out, and left in a spray of gravel, the backhoe rumbling silent behind her. I stood at the gate a long moment after they'd gone, hand on the cold iron, listening to my own heart slow down. I thought about Carol under that dark-turned earth, about Otto and my father beside her, and for the first time since I'd come home, I let myself feel something other than calculation. I felt scared. Not of Marlene, of how close I'd come to being too late, of what it would have meant to stand here and watch a machine tear into ground that held everyone I'd ever loved. That night, I sat at Otto's desk with the lease in front of me and didn't touch it. I just looked at it, the way you look at a loaded weapon you're not ready to fire yet. Part of me wondered if I was doing this right, waiting, documenting, playing by rules with a woman who'd already shown she didn't have any. Carol used to tell me patience was my best quality and my worst one, both at once. I sat there past midnight, diesel smell drifting through the window from the generator, and I thought, if I move too soon, 60 families get thrown into chaos with no warning and no plan. If I move too late, somebody gets hurt worse than a cut chain. I decided, sitting there, that I would move exactly once, and it would be perfect, and it would be legal from the first page to the last. The next morning, I called Pete and we started building the case the way you build a bridge, one certified load-bearing piece at a time. First, I filed a formal complaint with the McLennan County Sheriff's Office documenting the cemetery incident, attaching my video and requesting a case number, which I got, 24-0847. Deputy Raymond Ochoa took the report himself, watched the footage twice, and told me plainly that cutting a lock and threatening headstones with heavy equipment was at minimum criminal mischief under Penal Code Section 28.03, and possibly worse given the location. He asked to keep a copy of the video for the file. I gave him one gladly. Second, I went to the county clerk with Pete and pulled the full permitting history on Tract 14, going back to 1924. Every barn, every fence, every well permit, and had certified copies made of every page. Buildings that predate a covenant can't be cited under that covenant. That's basic property law, but juries and judges like to see it laid out in paper, not just argued in a hallway. Third, I hired a licensed process server, a stocky retired constable named Hollis, to personally deliver Marlene Kessler a formal written demand. Produce, within 10 business days, certified proof of the association's underlying title to Tract 14 or cease all enforcement activity on the property pending resolution. I sent a copy to every address on file for the association's board. I sent a copy to the county clerk's office for the public record. Every letter went certified, return receipt requested, and every receipt went into the lockbox next to Otto's lease. Here's what most homeowners don't know. Under Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code, Section 12.002, filing a lien or claim against real property that you know to be fraudulent isn't just bad behavior, it creates civil liability, with statutory damages of at least $10,000 per violation, plus actual damages and attorney's fees. Every violation notice Marlene's association had recorded against a homeowner over 11 years Every lien threat, every land use fee invoice, every single one of those was a separate potential violation once we could prove the association's underlying claim of ownership was false. I wasn't building a case about a barn anymore. I was building 60 of them. Fourth, and quietest of all, I went to see Ruth Colby. She met me on her porch, oxygen line hissing, a folder in her lap thick with 11 years of HOA correspondence she'd kept in perfect chronological order, an old nurse's habit, charting everything, trusting nothing to memory. Her hands shook slightly, setting the folder in mine, but her voice didn't. "I want to be a witness," she said. "Not a victim, a witness. I've spent enough of my life on charts where somebody else decided what happened to me." "You'll be more than a witness," I told her, and I meant it, though I didn't tell her yet exactly what I meant. I was already thinking past the lawsuit, past the eviction of a fraud, toward who should stand at the front of Whispering Pines once the dust settled and the truth came out in open court. But that was still ahead of me. Right then, sitting on Ruth's porch with the smell of her lavender hand lotion mixing with the ever-present hay and diesel of my own clothes, I only knew one thing for certain. Marlene Kessler had put a machine within 20 feet of my wife's grave, and I had it all on video, time-stamped, witnessed, and filed. She'd handed me the first hard proof of criminal intent. The rest I now understood would come from paper. Old paper, 99 years old, sitting in a fireproof box at Otto's desk, waiting for exactly the right morning in exactly the right courtroom. The hearing was set for a Tuesday, 9 a.m. McLennan County District Court, and I got there at 8:15 with Pete, with Hollis the process server, with Deputy Ochoa off duty but present at my request, and with a fireproof lockbox I hadn't let out of my sight in 6 weeks. Marlene Kessler arrived at 8:50 in the cream blazer, clipboard under her arm out of habit, even though there was nothing left for it to hold. Her attorney was a young man from a Waco firm who looked like he'd been handed this file that morning and hadn't slept since. She'd filed suit against me first. Obstruction, interference with association business, seeking an injunction to stop me from harassing her enforcement crews. She thought she was the plaintiff. She thought she held the high ground. I let her attorney make his opening argument. I let him talk about covenants and recorded declarations and 11 years of established community governance. I watched Marlene's face while he talked, and I saw the same flicker I'd seen in my driveway that first morning, except now it looked less like contempt and more like a woman standing on ice, listening to it crack somewhere she couldn't see yet. When it was our turn, Pete stood and requested permission to enter one document into evidence. Judge Eleanor Whitfield, a woman who'd been on that bench 18 years and did not care for theatrics, told him to proceed. I opened the lockbox myself. I lifted out the lease, 99 years old, brittle at the folds, Otto's signature still dark where the ink had pooled thick under his pen, and I carried it to the clerk with both hands, the way you carry something that outweighs its size. "Your Honor," Pete said, "this is a certified, notarized ground lease executed in August 1924 between the Caldwell Land Company and Otto Hendricks, covering 900 acres in McLennan County, including the parcel currently known as Whispering Pines subdivision. The lease term is 99 years. It expired, by its own terms, in August of last year. Paragraph 14 provides that upon expiration, the land reverts to the lessee's heirs, free and clear of any improvement, structure, or encumbrance." The courtroom went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when everyone in them realizes the ground has moved. Marlene's attorney stood, started to object, then sat back down slowly, because there was nothing to object to. A lease is a lease, dates don't lie. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Pete continued, "records show the association's claim of title derives from a 2013 quitclaim deed from Whispering Pines Land Development Group LLC, an entity formed and solely controlled by the defendant, Marlene Kessler, 6 weeks prior to that filing. That LLC held no prior interest in the property. A quitclaim conveys only what the grantor possesses. The grantor possessed nothing." Judge Whitfield looked at Marlene over her glasses for a long moment. "Ms. Kessler," she said, Do you have documentation establishing your association's underlying ownership of this land, independent of the LLC transfer? The silence that followed was its own answer. That was the legal moment, the quiet one, the one that mattered most on paper. But the moment the whole neighborhood would talk about for years happened 2 hours later, out in the gravel lot behind the courthouse, in front of a Waco Tribune-Herald reporter I'd called the night before, and 2 sheriff's deputies standing by per a court-authorized writ of possession Judge Whitfield signed on the spot. I drove out to Whispering Pines with a convoy behind me. Pete, Hollis, 3 flatbed trailer companies I'd contracted a month earlier under permits I'd already secured through the county for oversized load transport, and a certified surveyor to mark the boundary Otto's lease described, foot by foot, exactly as written in 1924. Ruth Colby stood on her porch with her oxygen tank when I pulled up, and I stopped the truck just to look at her a moment. She wasn't wearing a cardigan that day. She was wearing a windbreaker, sturdy shoes, like she dressed for weather. "You ready, Mr. Hendricks?" she asked. "Only if you are," I said, and she nodded like a woman accepting an order she'd been waiting her whole life to receive. The writ gave me the legal right to remove unauthorized structures from land under my ownership, with 60 days relocation notice already served, certified, return receipt, every single homeowner, offering them free transport of their homes to any lot of their choosing within 50 miles at my expense, plus first right to lease their existing home sites from me at 1/10 what Marlene had been charging. That mattered. That's the part I want understood clearly. I wasn't punishing 60 families for one woman's fraud. I was punishing one woman. The first flatbed backed up to the house on Cedar Court that Marlene herself had lived in for 11 years, paid for with fees she'd stolen from her own neighbors. Hydraulic jacks lifted the frame off its foundation, inch by inch, the whole structure groaning like a ship coming off dry dock, dust rising off the foundation in a pale cloud that caught the morning light. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, homeowners in bathrobes, in work clothes, holding coffee, watching a house they'd once believed they owned get walked off ground it was never built on legally. Marlene arrived at 10:40 a.m., tires screeching, and ran across her own dying lawn, screaming that this was theft, that she'd sue everyone in sight, that I hadn't heard the last of her lawyers. Deputy Ochoa stepped in front of her before she reached the trailer, and that's when he pulled the second warrant out of his jacket, the one based on 11 years of falsified financial records Pete's forensic accountant had spent 3 weeks compiling, showing Marlene Kessler had personally diverted $2.6 million in land use fees and membership assessments into accounts controlled by her LLC, none of it ever disclosed to the homeowners paying it. "Marlene Kessler," Ochoa said, "you're under arrest for theft by deception under Texas Penal Code Section 31.03 and for fraudulent lien filings under Civil Practice and Remedies Code Section 12.002. He turned her around, right there on her own dying lawn, in front of the reporter's camera and 60 of her former subjects, and cuffed her while her house rolled slowly past behind them both, headed toward a gravel storage lot I owned 3 miles east, where 59 more would eventually join it. The Tribune-Herald photo that ran the next morning showed Marlene Kessler in handcuffs, cream blazer wrinkled, watching her own house drive away on a flatbed trailer. The caption read, "HOA President Arrested After Decade-Long Land Fraud Unravels." The trial itself took 4 months to reach verdict, but the numbers, once the forensic accountants finished, were exact. Marlene Kessler was convicted on 11 counts of theft by deception and 6 counts of fraudulent lien filing. Total restitution ordered $2,647,300. Every dollar of land use fees and membership assessments collected over 11 years, traced through bank records her own accountant, a nervous man named Curtis Belway, testified against her to avoid his own indictment. Curtis paid a $40,000 fine for failing to report suspected fraud and lost his CPA license for 5 years, but avoided prison. Marlene received 12 years with restitution garnished from every asset she owned: the Mercedes, sold at auction for $61,000, a lake house near Possum Kingdom, seized and sold for $340,000, and a wage garnishment order attached to any future income for the balance. The judge, reading the sentence, noted specifically that the cemetery incident, the bolt cutters, the backhoe, the threat to headstones had weighed heavily on her decision, calling it a callous disregard for the dead that this court will not treat as incidental. The 60 homeowners kept their houses. Every one of them accepted my offer, free relocation to the original foundations once surveyed and confirmed inside the reverted 900 acres, at lease rates 1/10 of what Marlene had charged, with an option to purchase their lots outright within 5 years. Not one family lost their home. Not $1 of their equity vanished. The fraud had been Marlene's alone, and the reckoning stayed hers alone too. Ruth Colby is the president of Whispering Pines Homeowners Association now, a real one this time, incorporated properly, with me as landowner sitting on its oversight board only to make sure it never drifts the way the last one did. She still wears the windbreaker more than the cardigan. She still keeps a folder of everything, charted and dated, the old nurse's habit. I sit at Otto's desk most evenings now, the same roll-top oak he built in 1899, the lease back in its lockbox where it belongs, and I look out at 900 acres, finally, legally, entirely mine. Cattle grazing again where Marlene's sprinklers used to hiss, hay smell drifting up mixed with the diesel from my own tractor. Carol's grave settled quiet under the oak trees where nobody will ever threaten it again. What I learned, and what I tell anybody facing down a bully with a clipboard: document everything before you feel anything. Never let them see the real card until the room is exactly right. Justice delayed by patience isn't justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice being built properly, board by board, brick by brick. And the quietest man in the room is usually the one holding the paper that matters most. Pete tells me there's another lease buried somewhere in Otto's old files. A mineral rights agreement from 1941 I haven't had time to read yet, tied to a gas company still operating 3 counties over. I imagine I'll get around to reading it. Eventually.